Hi, folks. Welcome to Green Pill, where we talk with health pros about how they've helped their family, friends, peers, and especially their loved ones get healthier and what's worked and what hasn't. We have here Amanda Butler, LMFT from Salt Lake City, Utah. So excited to have you here, Amanda. Would you mind just telling us a bit about you and how you came here?
Yeah, I'm like you said, a licensed marriage and family therapist in Salt Lake City, Utah. I work with people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, relationship issues, psychological aspects of health issues, and concerns related to faith and spirituality. And I'm really excited to be here. We did an interview last year, near the end of the year, about just kind of how I started my private practice and things for other people maybe to incorporate from my journey. And so I'm really excited to be here sharing a different aspect of my journey with you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for being so open to kind of getting personal, which I know sometimes therapists are so focused on their clients that there aren't as many outlets for them to talk about like their personal lives. And I think it's really interesting what you shared with me on our initial call, where some folks in your family, it seems like you've always been the healthy one, exercising, really focused on your food, and you've gone through your own therapeutical journey personally before you became a therapist and now as you are a therapist. So maybe you could just touch a bit on your journey to get where you are today.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember always being interested in things related to health and psychology and self help. If there was like a magazine around the house that my mom had gotten, I would flip through. And if I would come across any articles about relationships or health related topics, I would read them. And my family, I think, when they saw it, kind of thought it was weird, but I was always interested in that. I was the family member who was out going walking after school and trying to get exercise and interested in like whether we were eating healthy. And my family kind of had an interest sometimes, but not as much as I remember having. I remember my sister, when she was younger, being a vegetarian, and I would tease her a little bit about being a vegetarian who didn't eat vegetables, and which was not the right approach. It didn't help things. So that's a no as far as encouraging loved ones to be healthier. And so growing up, there was always that interest in health there. I remember being 15 and being into kind of self help books and psychology, coming across a book about dreams and working with dreams and getting really into that. So it was always there. Um, then, when I had to pick a major in college, I wasn't really sure what I would do with a major in psychology. So I went another way. I studied biology and worked in the life sciences field for a while. Wasn't really very happy in that, but didn't know what else to do. I struggled with a lot of kind of vague health problems like chronic fatigue and gastrointestinal issues, anxiety, depression, things like that that didn't really respond well to conventional medicine. But I did go to therapy and that started to help with some of it. I also sought out alternative treatments like acupuncture and looking at nutrition and naturopathic medicine, and that has helped a lot. And I still go to therapy to this day. I believe that it's really important for therapists to be doing their own work. You can only take someone as far as you've gone on your own journey. And so I want to really be able to show up for people and help them.
Hmm. Hmm. And thank you for sharing about those illnesses, which you couldn't really, typical medicine system couldn't really figure out for you. And so it's important to hear about your health journey for the listeners, so you can share, first how you came to be a licensed marriage and family counselor, and also, and tell me if I'm getting that acronym right. Also sharing that the traditional medical system won't always work for folks. So, would you mind diving in a bit more on like what worked and how you figured out that chronic fatigue and those other things going on?
Sure. I went to a lot of doctors. I had a lot of doctor's appointments in my 20s and 30s with different medical specialists. to rule out different things that could be causing these illnesses. Like I saw a cardiologist, several gastroenterologists, my general practitioner, family medicine doctor, even a sleep specialist, and everything was usually pretty inconclusive. The results that I got were like, well, you're fine. We can't find anything wrong with you. So I started looking into other things. There have been a few naturopathic doctors that I've seen that have recommended other types of testing um, that are not really in mainstream medicine and that could show, vitamin deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, and so taking some supplementation to help with those. Um, and then working on kind of the psychological aspect of not being happy with what I was doing at the time, that chronic stress and chronic kind of unhappiness of doing something that is just not working, living life in a way that's not working very well can also be sort of a mental and emotional thing that puts stress on the body. So there is a very strong mind body connection, and working through some of that emotional and mental stuff related to this was also very helpful. I also found a lot of stress relief from acupuncture. That has been a big part of my journey, kind of as a way to just relax and kind of reset after a difficult week or a difficult day. That has been really helpful as well. So, naturopathic medicine has worked really well for me. Acupuncture. I've also worked with chiropractic a lot, and that has helped as far as the things I was experiencing, particularly after a car accident where I suffered a concussion and whiplash. Chiropractic really helped with that,
Oh
as well
wow.
as the acupuncture, actually.
And so you've really run the gamut from traditional medicine through all the way through naturopathy, and I'm sure even going on a different plane, various spiritual practices, and also just getting in tune with who you are and what you want. And actually, I wonder, given the amount of determination and work you put into figuring your own health out, it's probably inspirational to those around you. You know, um, I mean, where do you feel like just the everyday person that you see in your practice or peers, even friends, family, like, where do you think they fall on that level of determination to figure things out? Do they stop after traditional medicine? Do they stop after one acu appointment? Do they ever look in the mirror and say, hey, maybe it's my work that's kind of killing me? Because sometimes things are so obvious from the outside. So I'm just curious, yeah, your perspective on that and what folks can do to drive forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I see a wide range of experiences. Some people kind of stop after traditional, Western medicine and they're not into anything alternative. That seems kind of weird or like some kind of voodoo woo woo thing, like, oh, acupuncture, sticking me with needles. Ugh, I don't think so. That's crazy. Or taking a bunch of supplements. No, I don't think so. So a lot of people do stop after that and just kind of feel really stuck and like there are not alternatives available, and maybe they just didn't have anyone to show them anything different, and so that informs a lot of where they're coming from. A lot of other people that I've met, clients and people in my personal life as well, maybe we'll try a couple of different things off the beaten track of traditional medicine. Maybe they'll try seeing a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor, but when they don't see results right away, they tend to give up pretty quickly and dismiss it like, oh, well, that's nonsense. It doesn't work. Some people, if they're really struggling, like I was really struggling and knew I couldn't give up, but also knew I couldn't keep doing what I was doing, will try a bunch of different things until they find something that works. Just because it's like if I have to go on living my life.
Okay, great. And so I think, of that range of experiences where people try a little bit, they try a tiny bit, it doesn't work, or they're like you, where they're extremely determined and keep trying until they figure something out. Then you have the folks over here who have kids, maybe have a career, they can't really switch careers. And so maybe they accept the psychological dissonance
Mhm.
of having a job they dislike. And it runs them down, but they kind of
Yeah.
accept it. Yeah. And maybe you can touch on like what made you push through. I mean, was it the car accident that did it and the concussion that resulted? Was it just you were so unhappy with what you were doing? Could you
A
touch on
lot of
that
it
maybe?
had to do with being really unhappy with what I was doing and not being able to see continuing to live my life that way until I could retire. It was like, okay, if I'm going to be feeling this way, doing this kind of work that I am not really enjoying for the next 35 years until I can retire, what's the point? That's not really much of a life that I would like to live. And so I knew that I had to find something else that could feel more like a life worth living.
And was that in concurrence with your car accident and the stuff the chronic fatigue stuff? Was it all around the same time? Maybe you could just give a quick
The
timeline
chronic
for
fatigue
folks.
stuff started in my 20s, around 22, 23, and I struggled with that for a long time. The car accident actually happened while I was in graduate school trying to finish my degree and my internship hours. And so I had to lean
Hmm.
very heavily on the um, kind of practitioners that I was seeing and the treatments that I was getting to heal from that while also being able to do what I needed to finish school. So the career as a therapist was kind of the meaningful career that was my life goal of this is something meaningful I could do. I couldn't really quit on it because of the car accident and the concussion. So, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, cool. So you were pushing through the fatigue stuff while you're working at your job in life
Mhm.
sciences. You're going to therapy. You make the decision to switch, go into school for therapy, graduate school. Car
Mhm.
accident happens. You already have these practices because you're trying to figure out the
Mhm.
chronic fatigue. You double up on them, lean in, and by the point you entered therapy school, grad school, and by the time that unfortunate accident happened, you had kind of figured out some things that would help you, like getting
Yeah.
the diet right, the exercise right, acupuncture as a good outlet. And of course, you know what I do as a health coach, helping people with sleep, food,
Mhm.
and fitness and emotional health. And so I'm no stranger to that
Mhm.
journey myself, where lots of stomach issues, lots of mental health, anxiety, depression, struggling to be in control,
Mhm.
mood regulation. And I mean, I was always a big exerciser, and therapy was always a part of my life since I was probably
Mhm.
15. But until I dialed in the food and the sleep and a few
Mhm.
psychotropic meds, so Lamictal, mood stabilizer, etc. I was really able to come
Mhm.
to some balance, but it did take a lot of experimenting. And I'm someone that's very determined, and I come from some privilege where I can have time and good insurance,
Mhm.
etc., to explore those things. What do you think makes people miss the mark on that determination? Because it's kind of part of that story of
Mhm.
getting healthier. People get frustrated, they give up. What have you
Mhm.
seen out
There
there?
is a lot of that frustration and a kind of a misunderstanding of if you've been feeling unwell or struggling with health issues for a long time, that's not going to be an overnight fix or maybe even a fix of a couple of months.
Mm,
I had one practitioner,
mhm,
a chiropractor, tell me that for the amount of years that someone has been struggling with the condition, it takes about that many months of active treatment. So if I've been having gastrointestinal issues for 12 years, I'm looking at maybe 12 months of active treatment to start resolving that. And that can be hard for a lot of people, especially if there are maybe financial concerns or career concerns, not having time, that kind of thing, or just getting kind of burned out by having to go to a bunch of appointments or make a bunch of changes. It the society that we live in is not really set up in a way that functions to assist people in living a healthy lifestyle, and a lot of people can kind of drown in that.
Okay, so it's could be anything from too much work, home issues, financial issues,
Mhm.
um, and not knowing that
Yeah.
really could get better. Like you touched on at the top of how it's just not always clear that acupuncture could work unless you know somebody who's done it, especially in your place where if you're maybe not in a big city, or I
Yeah.
mean, Salt Lake's a pretty big city, but even still, maybe your friends are like, well, what is
Mhm.
acupuncture? And it feels weird and woo woo. depending how open people are to
Mhm.
new things. Um, and I guess like what do you recommend people when they're anyone listening to this or anybody who sees this, if they're dealing with some chronic health stuff, like how should they persevere? I mean, yeah. What would you say? I have a
Yeah.
few views myself.
It can be really beneficial to seek out someone like you, a health coach who has been on this kind of journey and can offer some guidance about the reality of the situation, like that it things don't resolve overnight. It can take some time and some determination. And also maybe just talking to other people, like if they're not in a place to hire someone like you, talk to other people who've done similar treatments or had similar struggles to find out what worked for them and to get kind of a picture of what to expect. Because a lot of times when people don't really have an idea of what to expect or the trajectory of what something could look like, that can feel really scary, and dealing with the unknown can be kind of overwhelming to people. And so just having an idea of what it might look like and what to generally expect can be helpful as far as that understanding and being able to stick with it, knowing it's not just an overnight thing or you go to like 3 acupuncture sessions and you're cured of the chronic fatigue or gastrointestinal problems or whatever the case might be.
And there's so many places I want to go with that because what you said is like really need someone in your corner, whether it's a health coach or someone like you who's
Hmm.
a therapist who can cheer you on week to week and say, hey,
Yeah.
this is going to get better. And by the way, you also need the provider to give you a plan. Like you said, the chiropractor said, hey, 12
Hmm.
years, 12 months. Okay. Now I
Yeah.
know what I'm working with. I can be optimistic and say 6 months, but that's still 6 months and
Hmm.
20 appointments, you know? And then what you also touched on, really folks, they have someone in their corner. Having a timeline is important. Well, I think those are the two big ones. And I mean, did you like growing up? You said you were a runner and maybe you played some sports, and you touched on a bit about your background and community that you were raised in. I mean, did people have coaches and therapists and uh, that kind of thing growing up for you? Because like, growing up, I had a piano teacher. I had like all my intramural group sports. You know, I was homeschooled for a couple years. I was in therapy when I was a kid. You know, I was in enrichment classes, so I had a ton of like support, and I was really open to like
Hmm.
being coached and being. So, in fact, when I'm missing that, that's why I really hire people like you.
Hmm.
So, did you have that growing up, or what made you seek it
I
out?
didn't have that kind of thing growing up. The situation where I grew up in, therapy was, I don't know, not really understood at the time. I was born in the 80s. And when a teacher at parent teacher conference in elementary school suggested that I visit the school psychologist, my mom was just like, no, that's not going to happen. So people in my life as a kid didn't really do therapy or have coaches or anything like that. I kind of did my own thing as far as exercise and what I was doing, but I wasn't really on any sports teams. It was just me doing my own thing, trying to figure it out based on what I could find around me. So, yeah.
Hmm. And then but still, like when you were older, when you grew up, you got your own therapist, you found I mean, how did you find psychotherapy? I'm curious. And this all kind of ties back to when we're
Mhm.
supporting the people around us, like using those narratives, because we figured something out. And I'm not by no means am I like reached nirvana yet. I don't know, maybe you have. Like I feel okay, and you seem like you've gone through a lot of stuff and you're
Mhm.
like okay. And I think that's where we want
Yeah.
most of our friends and family to be, and our patients and our clients. So, yeah, what made you
What
find
made me
therapy?
find therapy is I was 22 or 23 and having some major issues in a relationship I was in at the time. And I was also really unhappy at the job where I was working, but they did have an employee assistance program. So I called the employee assistance program and they set me up with a therapist. And that's kind of how it started.
Nice. So you were having issues, you sought help, and then somebody was like, "Hey, therapy is a good idea," and you,
Yeah.
you kind of went for it. Cool. So you're fairly independent minded, and you figured this stuff out on your own. And then, like switching gears, was your family supportive? with your chronic fatigue, with the relationship stuff you're going on? Are you someone that confides a lot in them, or was it more like, hey, talk about the weather and hey, how are you doing? Like how much did you involve those around you in what you're going through?
I might have mentioned some things briefly at the time. It didn't feel like there was a lot of support there. That's changed over the years, and the family situation feels more supportive. But back then, I didn't say a whole lot about it. I'm not really sure how much I mentioned besides just a brief overview of, oh, I'm going to therapy or I'm struggling in this relationship. I didn't go into that much detail.
So you would share that you were in therapy maybe, but you wouldn't like you know totally try to seek help from the family and figure out what was going on. So you were really a self seeker. And I guess coming back to your peers, your family, your patients, do you find that your family's also like that, where they like to go figure things out on their own, or is everybody different in your
There
family?
is kind of an independent streak and self seeker streak in my family. Um,
Hmm.
it tends to maybe burn out a little bit sooner with other people in my family than it does with me. Yeah.
Hmm. And are they? I mean, does that like independent, self-seeking, driving forward? Does that express itself in other areas of their life? Maybe just not on the
Yeah,
health
it
area.
it
Would you say?
expresses itself in other areas. My sister, she's very independent minded as far as her kind of side business that she has as a graphic designer in addition to her job doing that. Um, and with my parents, they
Nice.
were, kind of focused on doing their own things in their own way as well, like their hobbies that they had. And so that was kind of their way of being independent.
Hmm. And just sounds like folks in your family are fairly driven in their way, and I just wonder how. And same with my family too. And I always wonder, like, how can we take that same mindset you have towards work, towards your health? And that's a big question for me. It's why I started this conversation with you, and as we're building this podcast and this interview series, because it's people are really good at certain things, and I just that same skill set I think could be applied to making themselves feel better and prolonging their life and just making their lives easier for their families. Is there any narratives you like to share off the bat, or I can touch on a few we talked about in the past?
Let's touch on a few that we talked about in the past.
Okay, awesome. Well, one, you said like one of your close family members, they were experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression and some things with their relationship going on, which they shared with you. And I guess some
Mhm.
personal health issues as well. And can you touch on like what your initial reaction was, or what your relationship has been with that person over time, in terms of like sharing and caring, and then initial reaction and how it progressed from there over the years,
Yeah.
and any wins?
With this
Yeah.
particular family member, she and I are really close. I feel very protective over her, and I always want to be there for her to help her in whatever way that I can. It's really hard for me to know that she's struggling or unhappy. So, there have been a couple of times over the years where she expressed an interest in therapy and said she was struggling with some anxiety, depression, maybe some ADHD. So, a few times I found her lists of referrals for a therapist and gave them to her, but then she didn't follow through. This most recent time, I found her some referrals. She did end up finding someone, but it was more for like medication management of ADHD. But, that's a step in the right direction.
Mhm.
And then she also has struggled with some other kind of more physical health issues. And I gave her some recommendations as far as the naturopathic doctor that I see and maybe a couple of other ones. She ended up finding an integrative medicine doctor that she likes and has been going to. And so that has been a good step, I think. And I have seen that it has helped her with the kind of relationship piece. The pattern in my family around that has been to kind of complain and complain about relationship issues without really, actually talking to the partner about it or going to therapy or really doing something about it. but we can keep working on that one. This family member does follow me on social media, and so sometimes if I post something related to, like, couples therapy and that, it's kind of for her.
I love that. So it's like you're writing it and you're like, I
Mhm,
hope you read that. It's like sometimes I think with my girlfriend, like, should I post a meme that tells her not to wake me up in the morning at
mhm.
7 a.m.? That kind of thing. Um, so so for you, that's actually one way on social media you can talk to your close people without
Yeah.
actually saying something to them, and generalize and put it in third party terms. Um, yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear, and we can cut this if we want. Like, you grew up in Salt Lake
Yes.
City, is
Well,
that right?
in Provo, Utah, kind of
And
50 miles south of Salt Lake City, but it's all one big metropolitan area.
okay, so Provo, 50 miles south. Okay, so you wouldn't say you're from Salt Lake if people asked you, but if I asked you and I'm not from Salt Lake,
Yeah.
you would just say Salt Lake for me to be easier. Yeah, and you told me that the community you came from, the alcohol was forbidden. Is there anything else you'd like to share with folks about where you came from, how that's affected you, how that's made you become a therapist, and then coming back to this close person, how that's and the people, how that's affected, the complain versus do something versus take
Mhm.
action. Is there a link there between those
Yeah,
two?
I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church. There are a lot of things about that that didn't work for me. It was not really my spiritual path. I understand, though, that for a lot of people it is, and they are really identified with that. But things like alcohol, smoking, use of any kind of drugs or anything like that was forbidden. Um, the attitude towards women and relationships, from my perspective, always felt a little bit misogynistic, like women were second class citizens and didn't have much of a say in relationships, like they were just supposed to kind of do whatever the man told them. I don't know if that has changed over the years because it's been a while since I've been involved. But I think that had a lot to do with the pattern that I saw in my family of my female family members just kind of sitting and complaining about their husbands while not actually addressing the issues with them. It's like maybe they didn't feel like they had any authority or any say in resolving the relationship issues or getting therapy to deal with that, because it just was like, well, this is just what I've signed on for, and I just have to put up with that. And I do see, a fair number of clients now who are part of that faith. And so maybe it has changed, but back in the day, it was really not a thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, I wonder if your clients, are represented in LDS community because you must have a intimate, at least a decent knowledge of how
Yeah.
to speak their language, quote unquote. Because it's a really tough thing to not have agency. I mean, it's one of the, I think, core parts of emotional and psychological health, if you'd agree. And so bringing that back to your family, do you feel like for them that you became a therapist, they understood it, what you do? Were they dismissive of it? And then, like, when you get together for Thanksgiving or another holiday, are they ever asking you
A lot of
questions? Yeah, I guess their attitude, and then, yeah, do they ask you stuff?
Yeah, at first, I didn't feel like their attitude towards my making the career change was very supportive. It felt to me like they saw it as, well, you already have a decent career, like, why go through all of this? And then over the years,
Hmm.
I feel like that has shifted. They ask me a lot more questions. I had this assignment where I had to practice doing therapy, like practice listening skills or something with people and write a paper about it. And one of the people I practiced with was my mom. And after we did the little assignment, she was like, "Oh, yeah, you're actually pretty good at this." And so over the years, it has shifted and they've become more supportive and more understanding.
Nice. And has any of your therapizing rub off through osmosis, like on them? Have they started to do things that
A little bit.
I don't know?
A
Yeah,
little
does it rub
bit.
off? Yeah.
My mom, with her church, actually does volunteer work at the psychiatric hospital with the people there who are members of her church. And she has commented to me, like, oh, I think that a lot of these people are really misunderstood and just really need some understanding and someone to care about them.
Uh,
Words to that effect.
wow. Is that typical in the LDS community that to see how is mental illness seen generally? Yeah.
There's a range of views. I think probably each person in that community has their own view. There are segments of that community who see it as maybe not beneficial to go to therapy, like that problems could just be solved by praying more or, you know, being more faithful. There are other people within that community, a lot of the LDS clients that I see who are very much believers in mental health and that therapy and getting that kind of support can be beneficial. So it's a wide range of views.
It ranges. Yeah, it ranges. Cool. And when you I guess well, you touched on one of your close family members, and I wonder, do you have any other anecdotes that come to mind, either from family or peers or folks that have approached you in your personal life, where you were able to make an impact, and then you can also give me one where you tried and maybe spectacularly failed, or whatever.
Yeah, with a few clients, I've been able to make an impact. There is one client I've been seeing for a while who struggles with some chronic health issues, some concerns related to weight, and some other things. And he always has like these really big goals for how he's going to kind of change his life overnight. Like, oh, I'm going to do this 10-day juice fast and drop 15 pounds from that. And then everything's going to be better after that. And so in the work with him, there was a lot of behavioral stuff around, okay, well, maybe let's make some small changes that are more manageable. And it didn't seem to stick until about maybe a year later when he started talking about, oh, I guess I just need to take some smaller steps and maybe swap out eating fast food for eating like some chicken and vegetables for dinner and make some small changes and talking about it like it was his idea. And so that is something I consider a win.
Definitely a win, huge win. And it might have been not just his idea, but an idea
Hmm.
you co-created. But then he kind of brought it back up and said, "Oh, you know what? I've been
Hmm.
thinking," that kind
Yeah.
of thing. That's, yeah. So you helped him orient towards the
Hmm.
day to day and regaining control. Um, let's see what else. You touched on another patient, I think, when we were speaking, and another close family member, I guess, who it might be the same one who asked you for a list of recommendations, never followed through on that piece of it, but got some medication
Yeah.
management. And yeah, yeah. And at what point? I mean, I don't know how often you see your family, and like, how do you, especially if you don't. I mean, you must be relatively close to them
Hmm.
since you're in Salt Lake and you grew up 50 miles out. Do you have any patients who are far away from their family? One thing I see, and it's a question with an answer myself, and then I'll let you go. One thing I see is that I have a friend who her parents are in Virginia, and they're diabetic, and they're struggling with some heart conditions, and they don't eat particularly healthy, they don't exercise, they're above the age of 65, and she feels kind of helpless because she's in New York, 10 hours away. She can't be there to model good behavior. They're probably not on social
Hmm.
media. um, Her dad's gotten really into politics and gotten really angry about that stuff. Like, there's no real way she feels for her to model behavior. And oftentimes people say, well, just lead by example,
Hmm.
rather than proselytizing, which is something you
Hmm.
and I talked about, pun intended, with the church. And yeah, have you seen any of that with your clients, with your family as well?
With my family, it's easy because I am close to them, and we live nearby. With one client that I see,
Nice.
she's a nurse who's in nurse practitioner school. Her family lives in Idaho. And so she's not able to see them very often, but she has talked to me about making herself available if they ever have medical questions. She's talked to me about, suggesting dietary changes that they could make because her parents struggle with health issues. And so she, I think, is a really good example of being on call and just being available, like really making herself available and being there to answer questions they might have and to just be a support when they want it. And she has seen changes where they are more open to living a healthier lifestyle.
Did she tell you what she did? Like, did she just simply say, "Hey, I'm in nursing school. I've been thinking about a lot of these things. Please call me if you want to talk about it." Or what was her? How did she do it?
When her family has any medical issues, like any appointments, she checks in with them about how those went. And they talk to her about like test results that they've gotten, and she helps them understand that. And so I sounds to me from what she said like she just keeps an ongoing dialogue with them about where they are with their health and just is kind of always there for them in that way.
That's a really good one. So she kind of follows the course and schedule of the doctors and the follow ups
Mhm.
and the tests. And sometimes the biggest thing in health management is actually going to the
Mhm.
darn appointment.
Yeah.
So um, that's one really good way I think of when your family's not close to you to keep an eye on them. And so I think that's one practical way to do it. And then there's another practical way to do it is just self-regulate and say, I can't control
Right.
what my family does. I can't control my family's health. It's not really my business. And although them being sick would impact me, it's still their life. And I'd rather have a good relationship with them. And can you talk on anything you help your clients with on boundaries
Right.
around their family and
Right.
peers and loved ones?
And a lot of that as far as boundaries is about being aware of what you are responsible for and what you're not responsible for. You can be responsible for showing up for family members and providing the support that you can. And you also can't, drag them to go see the acupuncturist or functional medicine doctor. And so if you start to get really
Absolutely.
responsible and really caught up in, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to them if they don't get this health issue resolved, and get really caught up in that responsibility of trying to fix them in a certain kind of way, that is something that's really easy to drown in. And so the boundary then is around, well, I can be responsible for helping them with what I can help them with, but ultimately their health journey is kind of their responsibility. And I'll do what I can to support them. I'll
Mhm.
provide the referrals, I'll make the suggestions, I'll be there to answer questions or, offer whatever I can to them, and ultimately it's up to them. And just knowing that somebody is around who is supportive, who's maybe been on a similar journey and who maybe the family members can see like, oh, this person has made some healthy changes and that has worked for them. Maybe there is something to all of this with the acupuncturist and the naturopath. Like, this family member seems to be getting better.
Mhm.
Maybe there's something that I can take away from that that might work for me as well. Just really leading by example, like you said, is also kind of a way of having that boundary. Like, well, I'm leading by example, I'm doing what I can, and they're welcome to follow me, along this path if they want, but I can't drag them along or shove them into the car and make them go to the chiropractor.
Even though
Hmm.
sometimes I think we wish we could because we know the
Hmm.
chiropractor will help. Yeah, with the setting boundaries, do you have any kind of templates you use for conversations when you tell people, hey, like, and it could be anything, not just their health, but like, hey, I'm not sure how much. For me, it's like, hey, I'm not sure how much advice you want from me on this, or hey, I'm not sure how much support you want from me on this particular subject. Do you want me to set up the appointments for you and drive you there, or would you rather just me give you the name? I don't know what strategies and tips and tricks, because I want folks to take something actionable, really easily
Hmm.
actionable away from this. do you set up with folks? How do you coach them?
So, with one of my family members who shared that she was feeling kind of depressed and had thought about therapy, I said something to her along the lines of, well, if you want to do that, I feel like that would be really helpful, and I would be happy to find you a therapist or a list of therapists that you could call and who, would take your insurance and who might be a fit for you. And so just making the offer of, okay, this is what I will do if you're interested in having that out there. And with maybe family members or friends who are kind of talking about not feeling well and maybe not taking action towards that, the conversation around that can often sound like, well, are you just wanting to kind of vent about this right now and have me listen? Or would you like me to maybe do some problem solving and find you some referrals or do some things that could help, just so we're both clear on, yeah, they just want to vent right now because that will make them feel better versus they want me to actually do something so that I know what's needed and um, maybe not to put the effort into finding the referrals if they're not going to take it. So it just helps to have a lot of communication and be really clear on what's needed. Yeah.
Needed. Yeah, and I was gonna push back on your first point where you like person said, "Hey, I'm depressed. I don't feel good." And you're like, "Well, I can find you therapists." And that was my reaction 10 years ago where, I was just like, "Hey, I got you." And now having worked in business development and building my own business as a health coach for 10 years, I realized like you can kind of reel people in by saying like, "Oh, well, what could I do to help?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know." I say, "Well, you know, what do you think?" And you just keep letting
Mhm.
them like self-actualize the help. But then in your second narrative, you actually were like, "Hey, do
Mhm.
you want help or do you want me to
Mhm.
just listen?" Which is probably the first question. Um, in any case when a
Yeah.
friend is venting or a family or and then if they say, "Yeah, well, I could use some help," you say, "Well, what do you need help with?" They'll say, "Well, I don't know." And you keep letting them, in my experience, come back to you with some ideas on
Mhm.
help. And I guess with that particular case, they did not take up the therapy recommendations, even though you spent some time
Mhm.
getting them. Um, but how many times do you feel like people just want to vent versus how many times do they want help? Um,
The majority of
yeah.
times they kind of just want to vent, and then at some point they seem to get sick of venting and actually do want some help.
And like, I've had so many of my close friends like around me who vent, and I always want to just do some action towards helping. Do you think that's a feature of my my controlling personality or my go get it personality, or maybe you're similar to me, or what's that about, that desire to help, to fix, to take
I
action?
think it comes from a space of having suffered with something difficult and not wanting other people to suffer. Like, it's hard to see people that you care about struggling and suffering when there is something that can help them, and it might not even be that difficult for things to shift in a better direction for them.
Yeah. Thank you, I agree. It's guess I could get some free therapy on this podcast, but uh I yeah, learning from others' mistakes before making them, is usually a good strategy. And yet, you with your chronic health journey, maybe if somebody told you in your mid 20s or early 20s, like, hey, go see that naturopath, you might
Mhm.
have not done it. You might have had to go through a traditional medicine system because that's what felt
Mhm.
normal to you. Um, hmm. So with we talked about folks and family, we talked about some patients, we talked about having your family quite distant from you. And I'm just looking here at my notes. We talked on boundaries, some wins, and leading by example versus proselytizing. Something else you touched on is, and I think folks would benefit from, is
Mhm.
planting seeds. How do you plant seeds? How do you let your patients plant seeds, whether it be a husband wife, and the husband could really benefit from X, Y, and Z. How does the wife plant a seed without giving them a
Mhm.
plant?
And so, in kind of relationship situations where I've been seeing one partner and they feel like the other partner could benefit from therapy. Often planting that seed has looked like being willing and open to talk to the partner about therapy and what they're learning, and maybe framing it as, I really love you and I'm really concerned about what's going on. I feel that therapy has been helpful for me. And if you're interested, I feel like therapy could also maybe help you as far as these things you're struggling with. It can be just really helpful to get some support, and so if you're open to it, I would be willing to help you find someone. Just something kind of similar to that is what has worked. And people have, um, helped their partners open up to maybe seeing a therapist or getting some kind of other help.
And so the message behind that script is, hey, I really care about you, number one, and number two, I'm really worried about you, and number three is this has
Hmm.
really helped me, and then number four is maybe you could try it, kind
Yeah.
of thing, but it's up to you. Yeah. um Especially with couples, I think it's such an intimate bond. Is there ever a time and a place to have those conversations? What setting have you seen works well, and in those kind of tough conversations, whether it be couples or family?
Often at home, involved in some kind of quiet activity, like just, sitting around talking anyway and hanging out. That might be a place to do that. Or,
Hmm.
yeah, just oftentimes when they're already doing something together as a couple and things are feeling more relaxed, that can be a good time to bring something like that up.
Okay, so maybe not like a very dramatic, like
Yeah.
we need to talk, but more of a just like a casual, like, so hey, I've been kind of
Mhm.
noticing, that kind of
Hey, I've
thing.
been kind of noticing, or, hey, I've been going and seeing a therapist for a while and it's helped me. I've learned this and that. And, if you ever thought about going, it could be helpful. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Mhm. And just moving to the other side of the other person on the other side of that conversation, who might not be feeling great and is hearing that from their partner, and let's just say the partner brings it up twice in a month, or let's say the partner is maybe a more of a personality like me, who wants to fix, who wants to help, who wants to take action, um, and the other partner is like, God, Alex, like you're always not telling me what to do, or you're always suggesting things, you're always trying to, like, how what's a good way for the person listening who happens to be on the receiving end of this conversation, and if they're not interested, what's a good way to say that, for them?
Maybe something along the lines of, I don't feel like that's going to work for me right now, or, um, yeah, something like that can help. Possibly, this might be something that we could talk about later, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and that just goes back to kind of boundary setting
Mhm,
overall, in relationships, and it seems like that's that's a big part of your
mhm.
practice. Just just thinking here, so high level, your recommendations for talking to close family and close friends about health subjects is: one, setting boundaries; two, asking if help is needed before providing it; and any other ones you'd summarize and add?
Being open and remaining curious about what is going on with them, being open to their perspective and being willing to find out more, rather than approaching it from a judgmental, kind of critical place of, well, why are you always stopping and getting fast food on the way home? That's not very healthy. Why don't you just cook something healthy? Being open to,
Hmm.
well, what is it that
Hmm.
makes you want to stop at McDonald's every day on the way home? What's kind of hard about just cooking something healthier or eating something healthier? Kind of approaching it in that way.
Hmm. I really like that one. Just get curious, and we hadn't really touched on that because, like you touched, when we spoke before, getting curious, it
Hmm.
preempts judgment. It's like, because your
Right.
judgment might be wrong, right? About the reason they stop at McDonald's. You might think it's, I think you touched on this earlier when we spoke, that they stop at McDonald's because they're lazy. But in your anecdote, what was the actual reason they stopped at McDonald's, or the
The
hypothetical
hypothetical
actual
is
reason?
that they're maybe burned out from their workday and it just feels like too much effort to have to go home and cook something.
Hmm. Hmm. And so is it like it's I think they call it open-ended interviewing in some ways when you're asking an open-ended question. Well, what makes you do that instead of, and then also, do you ever see the word why causing issues? In my experience, using why sometimes seems aggressive, but when you say what makes you, it opens the person
Yeah,
up. Do you
that's
see that?
something they actually coached us on in graduate school was to rephrase why, because it can sometimes come across as judgmental. So it was like, well, what makes you feel that way? Or how did you get to that conclusion? That kind of thing. Yeah.
And that works in your experience? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good one. And I think when you're trying to help somebody, or when you want somebody to get better, when you want somebody to do anything, whether it's your kid or your partner or your friend, it's kind of trying to zero in on what the pain point is now. And if you just see somebody's eating McDonald's, it's like, well, that's dumb. They must be too lazy to cook. But if you ask five leading questions, you say, well, what makes you do that? I say, well, I'm really burnt out from work. Oh, what makes you burned out from work? Well, I have an hour commute there. I have to buy food there. I have to buy food on the way home, and then I get home at 7:30 and I have
Mhm.
no energy. Say, oh, huh. Well, what makes you not meal prep on the weekend? And I say, well, I can't meal prep on the weekend because um, I have to watch my kids and that and that. I say, oh, then only then, like as a health coach, I would say, hey, have you looked into those meal prep services? Have you
Mhm.
heard of those? And then like that question's much more apt rather than just saying the meal prep right after the McDonald's thing, because they would just say, no, well, I don't know how that would even work. Like it's kind of a lot of leading questions, and it gets into the perception. Rather, it gets into the
Mhm.
question of perception. Um, when you're having intimate relationships, and um, at what point, I guess maybe one of my last questions for you, Amanda, is like, how real can you be with your feelings? Is the world a stage, and do you need to always be acting in order to preserve people's peace of mind? Like, what's the difference between being really real, like I'm really worried about you, you're eating McDonald's every day, you're gaining weight, you don't look great, you look unhappy, versus the leading questions, not using why, and managing the perception of what you're trying to say? I mean, which camp do you fall in, and how important is it um, to
Mm.
do one of the two?
My approach is to be as authentic as I possibly can, express concern as authentically as I possibly can in a way that is going to feel accessible to people, if that makes sense. Being able to genuinely say, from a caring, authentic place of like, I'm really concerned about your health. I wonder what is making you stop at McDonald's every day. I feel like that's maybe not a healthy choice, and I want you to be healthy. Being able to approach that from an authentic standpoint while using language that is not going to make someone feel judged or blamed is the approach that I would take. And again, just connecting with an authentic sense of curiosity that helps kind of wipe away that judgment, so to speak.
Hmm. Hmm. So not just using language of curiosity
Yeah.
when you're really just judging, but
Mhm.
actually try to step back. That's really good. So I think that's the sweet spot, which I'm so glad we landed on. This was really great, and I'm really glad you're able to share some personal and vulnerable stories of your family, your peers, your patients anonymously, because I think it'll be tremendously
Thanks.
helpful to people who see this online.
Yeah, thanks so
So
much for
thank you so
having me.
much. Um, yeah, and I will link Amanda's interview with us in the show notes, and in the caption. Um, let's see, any last pieces you want to say? Anything you want to share here at the end to sum things up?
Sometimes it's important to just take the smallest step that you can toward something healthier. And so, like with the example of the person hypothetically stopping at McDonald's every day on the way home, maybe that starts with just cutting that out for one day a week and letting the letting there be kind of a snowball effect of building momentum and letting it get a little bit easier over time with practice. So just starting with the smallest possible step, whether that's cutting out fast food one day a week or going to the gym just for 10 minutes and doing what you can for 10 minutes and letting the positive momentum build.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for touching on that. And you're totally right. Everything starts with your first step out the door, your first step into the gym. Your first day, you go home and don't order McDonald's. That's the first step. And
Mhm.
as humans, habits really add up over time, like drops of water. So I like that. Summarizes a lot of the behavioral change we've been talking about. Um, well, Amanda, where can people find you, whether they're in Salt Lake City, whether they're online? How can they follow you, to work with you, to keep in touch, to learn more
Sure.
from
My
you?
website is amandabutlermft.com. And that's my website as a therapist. I'm also on Instagram at Alembic Amanda, ALEMBIC Amanda. And yeah, that'll get you to anything else you
That's
want
great.
of mine.
Awesome. And I'll link those in the caption and the notes. Well, thanks again so much for your time and for your presence and attention. And so psyched to keep in touch and keep the ball going on what we're working on.
Thank you so
Thanks again.
much.
All right. Take care.